The Lincoln 1-cent coin of 1965 sits at a powerful turning point in American monetary history because it represents the moment when the United States officially moved away from traditional precious metal coinage and stepped fully into the modern age of base metal currency. The story of this coin begins with Abraham Lincoln, whose image first appeared on the cent in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of his birth, making the Lincoln cent the first regular issue U.S. coin to feature a real historical person rather than a symbolic figure. By 1965, the Lincoln cent design had already been in use for more than half a century, with Victor David Brenner's iconic portrait on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, which was introduced in 1959, replacing the wheat ears reverse and symbolizing national unity and progress. The year 1965 itself is one of the most important years in U.S. coin history because it came immediately after the Coinage Act of 1965, a landmark law passed. In response to a nationwide coin shortage caused by rising silver prices, hoarding, and public distrust in paper money. Although the Lincoln cent had already shifted away from precious metals, earlier this law cemented the government's authority to change metal compositions across U.S. coinage and reinforced the idea that everyday coins were now tokens of trust rather than intrinsic value objects. The 1965 Lincoln cent continued to be struck in a bronze alloy composed of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, which had been the standard since 1864. And this composition gave the coin its familiar reddish-brown color and solid feel, even as inflation slowly eroded its purchasing power during the turbulent 1960s. This was a time marked by the Vietnam War civil rights movements, the space race, and sweeping cultural change, and the humble penny circulated through the hands of Americans experiencing some of the most dramatic years in modern history, from gas stations to grocery stores, school cafeterias to newspaper stands. The 1965 Lincoln cent quietly witnessed daily life, while larger events unfolded on television screens and in headlines. Millions of these coins were produced, with Philadelphia striking over 1 billion pieces without a mint mark, and Denver adding hundreds of millions more, making 1965 one of the highest mintage years in Lincoln cent history and reflecting the government's push to flood the economy with coins to end shortages and restore confidence despite its massive production. The 1965 cent is historically significant because it represents the last full era before copper prices began to seriously challenge the cost of production, which would eventually lead to the major composition change in 1982 when the cent shifted to copper-plated zinc. The 1965 cent therefore belongs to the final generation of solid bronze Lincoln pennies that many collectors and historians now see as the end of an age when coins still felt substantial and durable. The design itself remained unchanged, with Lincoln's calm, determined profile symbolizing stability during uncertain times, while the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse included the subtle yet powerful detail of Lincoln's statue visible between the columns, emphasizing transparency, democracy, and remembrance. Even as the coin lost purchasing power, its symbolic value remained strong, especially during a decade defined by protests, assassinations, and national soul-searching. Collectors today often overlook the 1965 Lincoln cent because of its common status, but numismatists recognize its importance as a transitional artifact linking early 20th century ideals with late 20th century realities. Error coins from 1965, such as off-center strikes, clipped planchets, and doubled dies, have gained attention over time, and high-grade uncirculated examples with full original red luster are increasingly difficult to find due to decades of heavy circulation oxidation and melting during copper price spikes. The story of the 1965 Lincoln cent is not about rarity or high dollar value, but about endurance, continuity, and historical context. It is a coin that carried the weight of a changing nation, 1 cent at a time, moving through pockets, purses, and cash registers as America redefined itself. And today, when held in hand, it serves as a tangible reminder that even the smallest denomination can tell a massive story about economics, politics, culture, and the everyday lives of millions of people. As the decade of the 1960s moved forward, the Lincoln 1-cent coin of 1965 continued to circulate during a period when Americans were increasingly questioning institutions and redefining identity. Yet the familiar image of Abraham Lincoln remained a steady presence in everyday commerce, linking modern citizens to the legacy of the Civil War and the preservation of the Union. The fact that the design had remained largely unchanged since 1909 reflected a deep national respect for Lincoln as a unifying symbol, and the 1959 introduction of the Lincoln Memorial reverse added another layer of meaning because it visually connected the cent to Washington, D.C., and to the broader ideals of freedom and equality carved into the memorial walls. The 1965 cent also represents the government's strategy to restore public confidence after the coin shortage crisis, because hoarding had become so widespread that many Americans were saving rolls of coins, believing metal content might become more valuable than face value. And although the cent was not made of silver, it still became part of that atmosphere of suspicion and economic uncertainty. The removal of mint marks in 1965 was another important decision by the United States Mint, because officials believed collectors were contributing to the shortage by saving newly minted coins from specific facilities. So from 1965 through 1967, cents were struck without mint marks, regardless of origin, which makes the 1965 issue unique in the long timeline of Lincoln's cent production and adds to its historical identity beyond simple mintage numbers. During this same period, vending machines expanded across the country. Laundromats, parking meters, soda dispensers, and public telephones all depended heavily on small change, and the penny remained essential for making exact transactions even as inflation slowly reduced what a single cent could buy. In earlier decades, a penny might purchase candy or contribute meaningfully toward a loaf of bread. But by 1965, its purchasing power had diminished significantly, illustrating the broader economic shifts taking place in post-war America. Yet psychologically, the penny still carried weight because pricing structures relied on cents to create the illusion of lower cost, such as 99 cents instead of $1, and the 1965 Lincoln cent, therefore played a subtle but powerful role in marketing and consumer behavior. The coin also traveled internationally in the pockets of soldiers stationed overseas during the Vietnam War, sometimes given as small keepsakes or tokens of home, and in this way the humble cent crossed borders and became part of personal stories tied to service, sacrifice, and longing. Collectors looking back at 1965 often study strike quality because the pressure to produce massive quantities sometimes resulted in weaker details, particularly on the Lincoln Memorial columns, and on Lincoln's hair above the ear, which means high-grade examples with sharp detail are more desirable in today's market. Although the coin remains common, its condition rarity tells a deeper story about the urgency of production. At the time, copper itself became increasingly important as industrial demand rose during the space race and military manufacturing, and the cent as a 95% copper coin reflected the broader industrial reliance on this versatile metal used in wiring ammunition and machinery. So even in its metallic composition, the 1965 penny mirrors the technological and geopolitical competition of the Cold War era. As the years passed, children saved 1965 pennies in piggy banks, coin folders, and glass jars, beginning lifelong hobbies in numismatics and learning basic lessons about history and economics through small change. Thus, the coin functioned not only as currency, but as an educational tool and cultural artifact linking generations through shared experience when Inflation surged in the 1970s, and copper prices climbed dramatically. Many earlier bronze cents, including those from 1965, were melted illegally for scrap, despite regulations against it reducing the surviving population of pristine coins and adding another chapter to the evolving story of intrinsic value versus face value. The 1965 Lincoln cent stands today as a bridge between eras, a coin rooted in early 20th century artistry, circulating through mid-20th century upheaval and surviving into the digital age where cash transactions are increasingly replaced by electronic payments. Yet despite technological change, billions of physical pennies continue to exist bearing the date 1965, silently reminding collectors, historians, and everyday people that even the smallest object can carry the weight of national transformation, economic policy, artistic tradition, and human memory. Beyond its role in commerce and symbolism, the Lincoln 1-cent coin of 1965 also represents an important chapter in the technological evolution of the United States Mint, because during the mid-1960s, the Mint was modernizing equipment, increasing automation, and refining high-speed presses in order to meet unprecedented production demands, and the enormous mintage of 1965 cents reflects how urgently the government needed to stabilize coin circulation after years of shortages and public anxiety. The pressure to produce billions of coins meant that quality control sometimes faced challenges, resulting in minor striking inconsistencies that today provide collectors with fascinating study material, such as die cracks, die chips, and subtle doubling effects that reveal the mechanical strain placed on dies during extended production runs. The absence of mint marks between 1965 and 1967 created a temporary break in the long tradition of identifying coins by facility, which blurred distinctions between Philadelphia and Denver production and symbolized a period when efficiency took priority over collector interest. This policy decision shows how economic necessity can reshape even the smallest design details on national coinage, while the composition of 95% copper linked the coin to a century-long tradition of bronze cents. It also positioned the penny at the center of future debates about rising metal costs. Because as inflation increased through the late 1960s and into the 1970s, the intrinsic metal value of copper cents began creeping closer to face value, creating ongoing financial tension for the Treasury Department. The 1965 cent therefore stands near the beginning of a long economic story that would culminate in the dramatic composition change of 1982, when the United States shifted to copper-plated zinc to reduce manufacturing expense in social context. The penny circulated during a transformative cultural era as rock music expanded. Television became a dominant influence, and major legislative reforms reshaped civil rights and voting access. And every transaction involving a 1965 cent connected ordinary citizens to a monetary system designed to provide continuity during rapid change. Children receiving allowance coins, merchants counting daily receipts, and workers feeding parking meters all handled the same small bronze disc featuring the steady profile of Abraham Lincoln, whose legacy of unity carried emotional resonance during a decade marked by division and protest. The Lincoln Memorial on the reverse further deepened that symbolism, because it honored the physical site where historic speeches on equality and freedom had recently taken place, reinforcing the connection between coinage and living history over decades of circulation. Many 1965 cents developed rich brown patinas from oxidation, while others retained traces of original red luster if carefully stored. And modern collectors categorize these color variations as red, brown, or brown, which significantly affects grading and market value. High-grade examples certified by professional grading services can command premiums not because of rarity and mintage, but because of the difficulty in preserving a common coin in flawless condition for more than half a century. Some surviving rolls discovered in old bank vaults or estate collections provide glimpses into how brilliant these coins appeared when first struck, allowing today's collectors to experience a small piece of 1965 as if time paused. For a moment, the penny also became part of popular sayings and traditions such as lucky pennies, and the phrase "a penny for your thoughts," embedding the 1965 issue within everyday language and personal superstition. Even as debates about eliminating the cent periodically surfaced due to production costs, the emotional attachment many Americans feel toward the penny has preserved its place in circulation, and that attachment is rooted in decades of shared experience, including the era when the 1965 cent first appeared. Thus, the coin functions not merely as currency, but as a cultural memory device carrying stories of economic reform, industrial change, social transformation, and personal nostalgia across generations. And, when examined closely today, the small date 1965, stamped beneath Lincoln's portrait, becomes a quiet doorway into one of the most dynamic decades in modern American history.